When people talk about conquerors, kings, and warriors who changed the course of history, one name echoes louder than most: Alexander the Great. A young boy from Macedonia who rose to power at just 20 years old, and in only a single decade, built the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. From Greece to Egypt, from Persia to India, his armies marched, his enemies fell, and his legend grew. But Alexander's story is not just about battles and empires. It is the story of ambition, brilliance, arrogance, and a destiny that burned so brightly it could not last long. Today, we uncover the full story of Alexander the Great, the boy who conquered the world. Childhood of a future king. Alexander was born in 356 BCE in the ancient city of Pella, the capital of Macedonia. His father, King Philip II, was a brilliant military leader who had transformed Macedonia into one of the most powerful states in Greece. His mother, Olympias, was a proud and fiercely ambitious woman who told Alexander from a young age that he was no ordinary child. Legend says that on the night Alexander was born, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, burned to the ground. Some took it as a sign that the child who had just entered the world would one day bring great change. Alexander grew up surrounded by power and politics, but also in the shadow of his father's greatness. From the very beginning, he was taught to believe he was destined for something greater than being just another king. Olympias often whispered to him that he was a descendant of Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, and even claimed that his real father was not Philip, but Zeus himself, the king of the gods. Whether Alexander believed it or not, these stories planted in him a burning belief that he was destined for immortality. The education of Alexander. When Alexander was 13, his father decided he needed a tutor who could shape his mind as well as his body. The man chosen was none other than Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age. For 3 years, Aristotle taught Alexander in philosophy, science, medicine, and literature. Alexander studied Homer's Iliad so deeply that he carried a copy with him on his campaigns for the rest of his life. But Alexander was not just a student of books. He was also trained in the art of war. By the age of 16, while his father was away on campaign, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonia. He crushed a rebellion with skill and bravery, proving that he was not only a prince, but already a capable leader. One famous story from his youth tells us how Alexander tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus. While no one else could control the animal, Alexander noticed that the horse was afraid of its own shadow. Turning the horse toward the sun, he calmed it and mounted it with ease. From that day on, Bucephalus became Alexander's loyal companion, carrying him into countless battles until its death years later. The rise of a young king. In 336 BCE, tragedy struck. King Philip II was assassinated, possibly in a plot involving rivals, or even Olympias herself. At just 20 years old, Alexander became king of Macedonia. Many thought he was too young, too inexperienced, and too unproven. Rivals rose against him, rebellions broke out, and enemies across Greece saw a chance to escape Macedonia's control. But Alexander wasted no time. In a matter of months, he crushed rebellions in Greece, destroyed the city of Thebes as a warning to others, and re-established his authority. By the time he was done, Greece was firmly under his command. The stage was set for something far greater. For years, Philip had dreamed of invading the Persian Empire, the largest and richest empire the world had ever seen. Now, his son would make that dream his own. Alexander would march east and attempt the impossible, the conquest of Persia. The conquest of Persia. In 334 BCE, Alexander led an army of around 40,000 men across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. For the first time, Greece would face Persia not as victims, but as invaders. The first great battle came at the Granicus River. Against overwhelming Persian forces, Alexander led a daring cavalry charge that broke through the enemy lines. His bravery almost cost him his life, but his skill and his men's loyalty carried the day. It was the first of many victories that would build his legend. Next came the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, where Alexander faced the Persian king himself, Darius III. Outnumbered, Alexander used clever tactics to strike at the heart of the Persian army. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving his family behind. Alexander treated them with respect, but the message was clear: the Persian king could be beaten. The final showdown came at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, one of the greatest battles of the ancient world. The Persian army stretched across the horizon, with war elephants, chariots, and hundreds of thousands of men. Alexander, outnumbered again, used strategy and precision to break through the Persian lines. Once more, Darius fled. The Persian Empire, which had ruled for centuries, was broken. Alexander marched into Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, the great capitals of Persia, and claimed them as his own. The boy from Macedonia was now the master of an empire stretching from Greece to Iran. Pharaoh of Egypt. In his march across the world, Alexander also turned south into Egypt. The Egyptians, long under Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. In 332 BCE, he was crowned pharaoh, the living god-king of Egypt. It was here that Alexander founded one of his greatest legacies, the city of Alexandria. Built on the Mediterranean coast, it would grow to become one of the most important cities in history, a center of trade, culture, and knowledge for centuries to come. But Alexander was not finished. His ambition drove him ever eastward, beyond Persia, toward lands that the Greeks had only heard of in stories: India. The invasion of India. In 326 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains and entered the Indian subcontinent. Here, he faced new challenges: monsoon rains, unfamiliar terrain, and warriors unlike any he had fought before. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, he faced King Porus, who commanded an army with massive war elephants. For the first time, Alexander's men faced creatures they had never seen, towering beasts that crushed men beneath their feet. But Alexander adapted, using his cavalry to outmaneuver the elephants and ultimately win the battle. Impressed by Porus's bravery, Alexander allowed him to remain king under his rule. It was a sign that Alexander valued not just conquest, but loyalty and respect. Yet, despite victory, his men had reached their limit. After years of constant campaigning, they refused to march further east. Alexander, though furious, was forced to turn back. His dream of reaching the ends of the world would remain unfulfilled. The long march home. The return journey was brutal. Crossing deserts and harsh landscapes, thousands of his men died of thirst and exhaustion. Yet Alexander pushed onward, determined to hold his vast empire together. Back in Babylon, he turned his focus to ruling as much as conquering. He encouraged marriages between his soldiers and local women, blending cultures together. He adopted Persian customs, dressed in Eastern robes, and tried to unite his empire under one identity. But not all his men approved. Whispers of discontent grew. Some believed their king was no longer Macedonian, but something else entirely. The death of Alexander. In 323 BCE, Alexander returned to Babylon, still planning new campaigns. He wanted to march into Arabia, to conquer more lands and expand his empire even further. But fate had other plans. That summer, Alexander fell ill after a banquet. Some say it was fever, others claim poison, but the truth remains a mystery. After days of suffering, the man who had never lost a battle, who had marched his armies across continents, lay dying at just 32 years old. His generals asked who would inherit his empire. His reply, according to legend, was, "To the strongest." With his death, the empire he built in just 12 years began to fracture. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought among themselves, dividing the empire into pieces. The legacy of Alexander the Great. Though his empire did not last, Alexander's legacy was eternal. He spread Greek culture across the known world, blending it with local traditions in what became known as the Hellenistic era. Cities named after him, especially Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning and power. His campaigns changed the map of the ancient world forever. More than 2,000 years later, Alexander remains one of history's most legendary figures. To some, he was a hero. To others, a ruthless conqueror. But no one can deny what he achieved. A boy from Macedonia, raised on stories of Achilles, tamed the greatest empires of his time and carved his name into history. Alexander once said he would rather live a short life of glory than a long life of obscurity. And that is exactly what he did. He lived fast, he conquered much, and though his life ended young, his story has never ended. Alexander the Great, the boy who conquered the world.